Good afternoon once again, Blue Cappers. Welcome to another edition of Let's Talk. Let's Talk is an initiative that is aimed to bridge the gap between policymakers, stakeholders, important stakeholders, and young people. It started just last year, around September. Part of the idea is to invite our members to come here, mostly younger people. Blue Caps is an organization of individuals under 40. In a couple of years, I'm out. I wouldn't even be a member of Blue Caps. But the initiative, in terms of recording, we record the sessions so we can put them out on YouTube so we can reach a much wider audience than could fit in this room currently. Moses, this year we intend to invite political leaders. You're the first we've invited for 2015. We're trying to get the other leaders to come and do a brief presentation. But for the most part, what we want is to get and hear from policymakers answers to questions from young people pertaining to any issue. Moses Virasamy Nagamooto has had a long and distinguished political career. He was born in 1947 in Wim Village under quarantine. Mr. Nagamooto is a qualified journalist and attorney at law, having attended the Allen White School of Journalism at the University of Kansas and the University of the West Indies Woodin Law School. He entered politics at the age of 14 and joined the PPP-led anti-colonial struggle for Guyana's independence. In 1964, he formally joined the Progressive Youth Organization of the PPP, and from 1964 to 1992, he was part of an unbroken struggle for the restoration of press freedom, human rights, and democracy in Guyana. Between 1976 and 2011, Moses was a member of the PPP Central Committee and Secretariat. During this time, he served as a parliamentarian and served on numerous committees, including the Select Committee on Constitutional Reform. He also served as the chairman of the Oversight Committee of that same Select Committee on Constitutional Reform, and he also served on the Foreign Relations Committee. Additionally, Moses was a member or a minister of the government between 1992 and 2001, serving under 4 presidents, that is Chedi and Janet Jagan, Samuel Hines, and Barra Jagdeo. He held ministerial portfolio as the Minister of Information and the Minister of Local Government and Regional Development. In 2011, he left the PPP and joined the Alliance for Change, where he was re-elected to Parliament that same year. Moses is also an author. He wrote the novel Hendry's Curse. Cure. Oh, Hendry's Cure, not Curse, sorry. Which was actually nominated for the Guyana Literature Prize for first novel. Currently, he's the vice chairman of the Alliance for Change and a potential presidential candidate in 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. Moses Nagamooto, and he will do a presentation to us, and the floor will be opened for questions and answers.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for inviting me as the first person among authors, eminent authors who would come here. And I'm happy that I've been accompanied on this occasion, rare occasions, by my wife, Sita, an educationist. I recall all her life, most of it spent in Orleans High School, close to the other German. And I was really on the way there to Rob Street Germans, and my son, Ernesto. But I'm happy that I have come here, because this for me is a reconnection with an important part of my life. When I came to Georgetown in late 69, 70, in the early part of 1970, Tiger Bay was the hub of new revolutionary life in Guyana. People didn't probably know that. On to this day, if you tell me about a man named Erlin, I said, who's that? I don't know him. We all knew a guy named German. And at the corner shop, perhaps I'll refresh my memory, but right in that street, on the other side, was this little shop that Juman Yassin, Harold Snag, Sham Juman, who died recently, who was a local lookalike of Che Guevara, had this movement along with Joshua Ramsamy in a very early period, talking about the oppressed people. This was like the ghetto. This was our equivalent of the Jamaican ghetto, the Bob Marley world that he had spoken about, Trenchtown and so on. And so it gave you an opportunity in a very young stage of your life to ground with oppressed peoples, ground with neglected people, and to be identified with those early revolutionaries who felt that they could make a difference by engaging and educating young people. It was, for me, the first lesson in Georgetown on how to not only mobilize, but to inspire, because German was just not an activist who ran around like a Rasta barefooted. He had a beard, a nice, decent beard, nice complexion, handsome man. But he showed people in a situation such as this that you had to help yourself. He started his shop, his crab soup was famous, and his arrows, and he'd throw in things as he went along, okras and so on. So I want to say that coming here today and having been invited by Clinton was for me a reconnection with an important part of our history, part of my life, because I hadn't turned back after those early contacts. Secondly, having been invited to be with you here, Blue Cappers, from what I read, you have chosen also, you made that choice, the life of volunteerism. You want to put social commitment as a high part of your life. And because of that, I decided that part of what I'm going to say today would be precisely dealing with where I have come from. The youth I remember who might have been not only enthusiastic about what's happening, but intolerant at the same time about what was happening and against what was happening. And so if you sit today and you listen to this old man talking to you, I would forgive you if you see anything I'm saying as part of what then was the conservative older generation, who felt that you could go along with things, you could drift. If we had a dictatorship in the 70s, there were people who felt the electoral road was the way to change that. Movement Against Oppression, Mao, and then Ratoon and the WPA were the offshoots of a radical alternative, that electoral methods were not the only methods of struggle. And I got very attracted to that idea from a very young age, to the extent where we were talking about armed struggle. I've seen people trying to revise history, but I go back to that movement that I knew, where the method of rule had to provoke a new type of response. And so in Guyana's history, at a period that I remember as a youth, armed struggle was not ruled out as an option for regime change, which would have been radical, but conservatives, even in the party that I had been associated with, the PPP, they were political personalities there who might have had an image of revolutionariness, but who were pretty conservative in relation to the method of struggle. So I could understand the young people now, if I told them that I am a member of parliament and that we were hoping that situation would change because we are talking now about new elections, you would say that I am no different from the older generation that had been intolerant of different methods of struggle, and that young people feel that regime change ought to come to this country by methods that should meet the challenge of the day. We have in Guyana today an authoritarian minority regime. We had under the PNC 28 years of minority authoritarian regime. And if there were young people who were intolerant and their revolutionariness led them to think that you need to put on the agenda aggressive methods of struggle, then it was important then, might not have been pursued. It has to be now a different form of struggle, which has to be a mass struggle, not simply a struggle dependent on orthodox, conservative parliamentarianism. So you may have to, as young people, decide whether you want to throw yourself into a broad movement of all peoples in Guyana. And when I use the word peoples, I simply don't mean that we have several Guyanese nations. It's because I refer to our various ethnicities and our origins, that we still don't seem to be grappling with that problem of national identity, of our oneness as Guyanese, that I use that in that way. But if you would be part of this new method of struggle and not simply relying on the party politics, single party politics vying for office, but that there should be built in Guyana now a mass movement of all of our people, all people who feel that you couldn't repeat history by living another 28 years of authoritarian minority dictatorship. So that's a challenge that you would face, and that's a choice you will have to make. Because I would expect, as I said, that you would be not anything else but conservative, that you would be impatient for change, you would be enthusiastic that results should come, and no one belonging to your generation of young people can contend with the fact that your country is politically marking time. If it is not moving forward, then it's certainly moving backward. And the fact that we have gone back to a method of governance that is 61 years old. In 1953, the British came and overthrew the elected government and suspended the constitution. The British landed troops and they destroyed what was then the first People's Parliament in Guyana. After universal adult suffrage, the first time ever that people were allowed to vote at the age of 21 without property qualifications. And there was a government, a national government, that was removed and the parliament was shut down. 61 years after, we have a repeat of history where the parliament was shut down. It is now called prorogation. In 1953, it was called invasion. But it's not important what name you call it. The effect is the same. It castrates the institution that was created by people, our people, in a historical process of struggle and sacrifice. And that cannot be countenanced in a traditional way. And that is why in Guyana, you have had developed a radical type struggle of left nationalism that the way forward for Guyana has been not conformism, but a type of rebellion in every stage that we have had in our history. So I would expect that there will be revulsion among young people that even the gains of history have been destroyed. And therefore, you have to ask critical questions whether politically marking time is a place Guyana ought to be. Now, we have been independent for 50 years, almost. 2 years would be very few, relatively short time ahead of us. And all we could think about is not that independence afforded our country an opportunity for us to have these noble characterization of sovereignty, of independence, in truly both economically, politically. We have now ourselves compromised our status of being independent, because we are telling the world that if we gave you a parliament because you're independent, you didn't know how to use your parliament, you shut it down. So it opens the country to a period of infamy, which had not existed any time before. Even in the worst period of rig elections, we had not arrived here, where by your own hands, as Shakespeare said in Henry II, I give away my crown. I hand over my scepter. This is what we did. We hand away our independence by doing silly act of self-preservation of a political elite by destroying an institution that represented the sovereignty and the independence and the political personality of our Guyanese people, and more than anything else. It encapsulated the ideals of freedom that had been harbored in the bosom of slaves, in the hearts of indentured laborers, in the spirit of the runaways, of the Maroons, and all of the inspiration that we can draw from history has been betrayed by a single act of a signature on a piece of paper that was is called prorogation. So that for young people, I believe that this is a challenge. Blue Caps, you have earned the name of young people who want to do something, to enhance your country, to be committed to civic responsibilities, to change your environment, to help to improve the condition of our existence. These are practical things, but none of these are going to be possible if you live in a stifled, putrid political environment that stifles the energy out of you, that smothers your desire for public life. And public life, I mean to be able to do good, to improve the lot of the Guyanese humanity, to be able to help to promote a Guyanese civilization, not this backwardness that we seem to revel in and baptize it as progress after 22 years. So the blemish today is in itself a challenge, how to change all of that. And this is your time. I have walked today with the Constitution of Guyana. For us, this is like the holy book. It ought to have been, but it has been desecrated by those who were to uphold it, those who were to preserve it. They have decided to use selectively those authority that the Constitution gave to them to subvert the Constitution itself. But like everything else, we don't allow the beauty of life to be destroyed because someone intends to destroy it. We take the beauty of life, put it or her on a pedestal, and we lift it up. And so we have a responsibility to the defense of our Constitution. Even if we have, it was made for good people, but bad people have misused her. So we don't blame this Constitution. It is those who have decided that they would misuse the authority, because the authority that was given was to establish a humane order, was to use the power to be able not to empower a few or to be able to empower those who would want to enrich themselves and their friends. But the authority of the Constitution, which is the power under law, was to be able to revisit history and to change what has been that ought not to have been, to be able to transform the inequalities that history had spawned in the country, to even to be able to adjust psychological damage that might have been caused by centuries of oppression. Power is a healing balm to which we all have access under the law, and it ought to be used for that purpose, to be able to set the wrongs right, and not to be able to use it to smother the right and to make the right into wrongs. So in this Constitution, and you will see, Clinton, I did prepare a very long thing here, but I'm not even going to refer to it because I want to deal with the Constitution, the preamble of the Constitution that says this. Because for me, if there is any manifesto in Guyana that is a manifesto for struggle, it would be this Constitution. Because it gives you the authority to fight for what is good and to fight for what is righteous. And it says that we are the proud heirs of the indomitable will of our forefathers in a spirit of reconciliation and cooperation. And that is because of the power that we would claim from our ancestors. We proclaim this Constitution in their name, and to be able to have continuity of what they would have fought for. This is not a passive document. This is a document of struggle. It is a document of struggle in continuity, and whatever is gained by that struggle, some other generation is going to take it and place it higher. As I said before, that we can be able one day to build a Guyanese civilization. And it speaks specifically to young people. This is what the preamble says. Acknowledge the inspiration of our young people who, in their own words, have declared that the future of Guyana belongs to its young people, who aspire to live in a safe society which respects their dignity, protects their rights, recognizes their potential, listen to their voices, provides opportunities, ensures a healthy environment, and encourages people of all races to live in harmony and peace, and affirm that the declaration will be binding on our institutions and be part of the context of our basic law. So that this Constitution is part of the civilization I talk about, that recognizes the power of young people, that inheres them with power over their lives to do something with that. And therefore, you as blue cappers, you as young people, you have a mandate to do what you feel you ought to do in the interest of building that society that reflects the ideals of your foreparents. And that is why I believe today the damage done to this Constitution was, for me, an unpardonable crime, that you could have committed the maximum act of derating and disrating your parliament in the name of a constitution, that it says it gives you the power to do so, and therefore I have done so. And then it goes at the back. It provides that there should be an anthem, and even though people do not refer very often to our national anthem, for me, it gives us a reflection of our own soul when we speak to Guyana as our mother, when we speak to Guyana as this land of rivers and plains, made rich by the sunshine and lush by the rains, set gem-like and fair between mountains and sea. Your children salute you, dear land of the free. Even what is happening today in Guyana is a deprecation of the soul of our anthem. The soul that lifts our country and made the country into a symbol of motherhood. We today cannot find in all that is happening in our country a realization of the beauty of what we sing about our country. Because what we see every day is a gangster-type dispensation, not only at the political level, snatching your rights, snatching the gem-like resources of the country, and pawning it, snatching the strategic resources, like the magnetic, the telecommunication medium, the electronic medium, television, radio. All the frequencies are gone to friends. Those are the gem-like things we have built in this country. Our forests are being hived off. Our minerals, you could exploit them if you wish. And if you care, you could give us a few droppings that may be called royalties. The state spends your money, the people's money, the taxpayers' money to build edifice to encourage foreigners to take them over. With your money, you're creating, giving away the gems that we have created. So that nothing that we glorify in our national anthem and we sing in our songs, we feel today is realized in the way we would want to. Our foreparents, or we ourselves, this generation in transition. Because you open the papers, you listen to the news, and every day someone is executed. Ruthlessly, brutally. And I would say, even with impunity, because they get away with it. Every day, beyond crime, is another crime that is not a dramatic crime. We put away the best of our young people in jails. And we say it's incarceration, and it's a punishment for smoking weeds. We create laws, realizing that the impact of some of these laws are not enhancing life anymore, but they are damaging life. And our laws, which we are authorized under the Constitution to make, says that someone who is brought before the courts for, say, I go back to cannabis, to weeds, cannabis sativa, if the person is smoking, you would make an order of court for that person to be sent to a rehabilitation center. Not jail, a rehabilitation center. And if the person goes there for 3 years, that may be the sentence. But you could establish by way of a certificate from the rehabilitation center that this person is rehabilitated, kick the habit, wouldn't go there again, perhaps. You could come back to the court and the court could commute your sentence. This is another form of the hidden violence of the society. The inverse crime that is not a crime that you perpetrate against somebody, it's a crime that your own law is interpreted to inflict upon your own people, the future of the country. And so we become immune to what happens to our population. I read the other day, and I still want to investigate this, whether in fact when we made our law, the Psychotropic Act, to deal with narcotics, particularly sativa, whether we have not in fact including hemp. Because I see this word hemp, H-E-M-P, is coming back in vogue, that states in the United States are legalizing it. They have placed it under regulation because it is a sister or a brother of cannabis, and it was banned, but now they're saying it has all the ingredients to make fuel, renewable fuel, to make plastics, that you could make cars, and they're finding 101 other uses for it, for things that we could really... So what I'm saying this is that our society ought to be exploring how to make things better rather than trying to interpret life only through the lens of politician and self-interest without looking at the interests of the wider community. Our young people, if I ask you, what are your beef? What is your beef? What is your problem? Most will just say jobs. And if you had a job, you'll say you don't know if it's a job that could give you a living wage. Some people are grappling, young people are grappling with, as I said before, with drugs, and people want to know if there is no way that this disease could be cured, or there's no way in which the law could be humanized to some extent that reflects reality, or they may have a sexual orientation issue that the society doesn't want to deal with. It's too cowardly because the leaders don't want to go there. They don't want to recognize some reality because it may result in the loss of power, loss of influence, loss of faith in the society, and so they are not going to address those issues. I came here today, Clinton, because you asked me to, not so much as a politician, but because I think I have been in the arena, public life, for more than 50 years as a teacher, journalist, and now in the field of law, that there must be something that I could go back into myself, that I can tell young people that the path to public service is glorious. That public service is not a life that you could regret anytime ever. It is something that you give of yourself to others, to society, and that's for me is an honor that the society could allow people like me to impart some of the experiences I may have, to impart some of the knowledge I may have acquired, to impart some of the values I could have cherished, because that's the way we will reproduce ourselves in a new value in other people, in younger people. And for me, that's an honor to be able to given an opportunity to do so. And I want to end, because I leave you to, I come across this today, a verse in John 15, chapter 15, verses 12, 13. And I really found this very interesting that I want to share with you. It says, "This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. Greater love hath no man than this, that he may lay down his life for his friends." Now that was said such a long time ago that I'd like to add to it and lay down his life for his people and his country, because this is what public service is all about. So if you are a blue capper and you have made a commitment that you want to give yourself to public life, then it is perhaps a frugal life. In many respects, it's a lonely life, because they say the higher you go up in the mountain, the colder it becomes. And so it's a choice you make to go to the mountain tops. And when you're up there, you have an advantage that the ones who have not made the choice would not have. You could look at everything. You could even see yourself as a master of everything below you. And so it empowers you. It gives you strength that you have chosen to climb and not to surrender. And that is what I want to tell you today. Nothing will change if we surrender. And you should not ever feel that you have the right to surrender Guyana to any group of despots, to any group that would have no appreciation for the values of struggle and the values of sacrifice and the history that rightly should be our empowerment. That is our forebears who told us that we should be proud to walk this journey. I want to stop here, and before I end, I want to say that I wanted to discuss one aspect of the contribution for which I have overspent my time, which is how do we go about realizing what the Constitution has said in relation to young people. And I had a proposal that as a priority, any politician who aspires to leadership in Guyana must be prepared to work and present a Guyana youth policy. Because it is a shame that though our Constitution provides so much for youth to be empowered, we don't even have a law, we don't even have a policy that tells us how to do so. And so I believe, for me, that is an unfinished task, and I'd like to share some ideas, if I can, in the narrow window of question time. Thank you very much for listening to me.
So now we'll open the floor. If you have an opinion or a suggestion, just keep it short and then get to the question that you want to ask our presenter today. No censorship. You can ask any question except for, well, Facebook language you use. We don't tolerate it around here. All right, so the floor is open. Anybody want to take or ask the first question? You got Ruel, and then I'll come back to Michael. And then Joel. Ruel.
Yeah, specifically referencing Constitution. There are a couple of things. Yeah, I don't get a sense, Mr. Nagamooto, and this time, that the 1980 Constitution, which established the executive presidency, was complete. Hence the reforms. I think there were about 12 amendments since. And there was a reform process 12, 13 years ago. Isn't the executive presidency too powerful, as Nigel Hughes has said? And shouldn't there be some reform process of the Constitution as it exists? Isn't that a party platform issue?
Yes, it is. As I said, that the Constitution has the powers given in the Constitution were powers meant for leaders who would exercise them responsibly. That's the first observation. But if you have, so far, most of the people who assume the leadership abuse these powers for opportunistic or for political reasons, to give them an advantage. It means, therefore, that the Constitution itself says that if that were to happen, you could revisit it and you could change it. So the Constitution gives you power to amend the power.
Yeah. Which prompts my
so that there is room for now. I take back the word room.
Yeah.
There is an urgency
Yeah.
in amending the powers of the president, the presidency, the executive powers, because those powers we have, as I said, have seen, they have been abused. They're too enormous.
Yeah.
And it shifts the paradigm of power in Guyana from the people to a person.
Yes.
And therefore, you have to bring an end to this kind of politics of the Messiah, the doctor politics. We ran away from that. But it seems as if the Constitution has created an opening for the return of doctor politics. I believe it's urgent that we amend this Constitution, and perhaps the forms would be suggested by the people after consultation, broad consultation. But I believe that you will have to humanize those powers, and in a way, initially my thought is to spread them. Yeah. If you have high functionaries like the president or the prime minister, and the Constitution provides for the appointment of a vice president, or perhaps more than one, you share the power. And the power must be shared in such a way in the context of Guyana to bring about what the Constitution wants us to bring about, reconciliation. And reconciliation in the Guyanese context must be ethnic reconciliation, and it must have balance. If you have power, it's no use. You have power and it's not shared in relation to gender, to bring the balance between man and woman, to bring balance between man, woman, and youth, and also among our races. So that's how I believe the next phase of constitutional reform ought to address the issues how to humanize the Constitution and to harmonize the power in keeping with our own reality.
Yeah, in practical terms, however, you're part of the Parliamentary Committee for Constitutional Reform, or which was in charge of the Select Committee.
Yes.
And the opposition, the political opposition, was in charge of that. I mean, it was about 5 members to 4,
right,
against 4 government members. Do you think enough was done within that 3 years period to visit? Because I noticed you use the words urgency now in relation to, I'm guessing, prorogation, and what prorogation is revealed. But was there anything done within that 3-year period beyond examining institutionally constitutional reforms that were 13 years late?
Well, put it this way, I'll be blunt. I don't think anything was done. I don't think the Select Committee did anything, because the terms under which the committee, although it's chaired by the opposition, the terms under which it has been established is that the Parliament has to refer issues to the committee to consider. And this Parliament, at least this lame duck Parliament that we had, I'm not going to even talk about the presidency, but it had referred nothing to be changed.
But is that a part of the Parliament of which you were part? I mean,
Yes, I'm saying that the National Assembly ought to recommend, send issues after the Parliament would discuss that here is an issue that we feel should be looked at from the point of view of changing it, come up with some ideas for change. But as I said, in the last 3 years, no issue was sent to the Constitutional Reform Committee. And because that being so, the terms under which it operated, you need to go beyond it. You need to set up by resolution a constituent assembly to convert the entire parliament into an investigative body that ordinary people can go and testify. When I was chairman of the Oversight Committee on Constitutional Reform, I was very flattered and honored, and I said at one time it was a great moment for education when I invited a group of Rastafarian from all over Guyana, and they came and they gave testimony. And they spoke to the issue of ganja, of the herb, and it was very persuasive because nobody understood the cultural use of the herb. And I said, sitting in the chair, that it was a great day for education. So there are people in the wider society who have a notion of how they feel about this constitution and what they want to change in it. So don't go for a piecemeal. You could set yourself initially a goal that we need to change the powers of the presidency, but don't end there. Go for a total review of this constitution. Not that the constitution, as I said, people say this is the Burnham Constitution and this. I don't subscribe to that. I mean, there are powers there that have been used even by people who were anti-Burnham. Shadi Jagan was president under this constitution. Hoyt was president under this constitution, but we had never had the abuse that we had under Jagdeo and Ramotar. So that there was a view that was a misplaced view, that people were to be made for the constitution. So, and as against the constitution, you have to fit, okay, the other way around, that the constitution was there, you have to fit into the provision of the constitution rather than flexing the constitution to suit the person. So we see now the constitution is being used differently by different persons, and that is the problem. So you need to attend to that urgently. But the need for broader reform should not escape us at this point in time.
My final intervention, should there be some sort of specifics with regard to prorogation as exists in other jurisdictions? I mean, if you want to prorogate, it should be within a specific time period that you are obligated to call elections.
Well,
or reconstitute the national.
That's a recommendation to the Constitution.
Yeah.
well, as it is at the moment, it says that you could prorogue the parliament for 6 months. And you have a window within that 6 months that you could either reconvene or you could dissolve and then call new elections. The 6 months is neither here nor there. The question is whether you ought to have a protocol in keeping with conventions in the world for wanting to issue a proclamation for prorogation. It must not be done on whims and fancy of any dictator who feels challenged by a vote of no confidence. That is not good enough reason. You must have a state of national emergency. You'll have to have a threat of martial law or a massive flood or an earthquake or a tsunami. You would have had to have extraordinary power to tell your parliament that this is not normal time for you to meet. But you can't use the parliament as an instrument of self-defense. You can't, because the Constitution is in self-defense, because the Constitution gives you the power to bring a government down. How could the Constitution give with one hand what it takes away with the other? Could not have given you the power to bring an unpopular, an unwanted government down and gives the power to an individual to abort that. It can't. It can't be doing those two things simultaneously. So I believe that we need to come out with a protocol that spells out how prorogation powers ought to be used. And that is, for me, also something of urgency. In the same way that we ought to bring a protocol or to clarify what we mean by 2 terms. Because although we say someone ought not to be elected for more than 2 terms, or 2 terms and no more, 2 strike and you're gone, at the same time, we had not put into the Constitution clearly that 2 terms mean the end. That's it, no more. You're not coming back. You're not going to the gym and exercise and come back, or have a bigger meal and come back and you're more powerful and ready to serve. So those are some of the areas I believe we need to put a little more flesh to them.
Mike?
Yes, good afternoon. I was very happy to hear you mention the subject of cannabis and hemp and so on, and the persons that are being incarcerated for smoking weed and so on. Yes, right now it is illegal, I understand that. However, I don't think a lot of people realize how the disproportionate economic realities of the classes force young people or people to different actions. A rich person or an affluent person would spend their time inside playing PlayStation 4 and watching cable on their 50-inch screen television. Not so well-to-do person or a lower-class person, if you want to call them that, are going to find themselves on the road. They're going to find themselves on the street corner, and they're picked up just for being on the street corner. That's something that happened to me numerous times. But I didn't have cable, so there's nothing to do inside. I thought you was the guy with the 50-inch screen. I wish, but I don't think people realize that that's what happens, and it is a systematic, I don't want to say, I don't know what's the right word, it's a systematic issue where these particular people are targeted and unfairly and unjustly punished, like you said. So I was very happy to hear you mention that. It shows that you're in touch with some real grassroots issues, which I think is very important. My question has to do with trust. I am still a relatively young person, but I'd like to be. I didn't say young, relatively young, and I don't want to say extreme distrust, but I have a lot of distrust for politicians. Not anyone personally, but across the board, because I have not seen any politician really stand out and step out, like you say, lay down their life for the country. I'm not saying anybody should actually be a martyr, but I have not seen a revolutionary politician. Like you said, in the old days, they used to take up arms and stuff like that. I'm not saying we should do that, but myself and a lot of my friends, a lot of people my age and slightly younger than me, people that are of the voting age, it's not just apathy as most people like to classify it. It's extreme distrust. It's seeing the exact things that you talked about. The frequencies are given away. I have no hope. No matter how brilliant my ideas are, or how great my proposals are, of getting a frequency, whether I have backers or not, because I'm not in that group. The people that are my friends, they worse off than me. What would you say to someone like me, or what can you say to me that I could probably say to them to put aside the distrust a little bit and maybe become a little interested again or something? I don't know. Is there anything you can say to that? Get them engaged again, because it's not just apathy, as people say, oh, they don't care. It's not just that. It's distrust that has them in that position, I believe.
Well, you've said a lot, and I want to say this, that in as much as we would want to feel different about our society, and ideologically there are some who would attach a taboo, a stigma, if you were to talk about class stratification. They would think that you have gone back to the old Marxian phobia. It was once a phobia. It was like a zombie to some. There is, in fact, class stratification in the society. And the class stratification reflects itself even in prison. You could enjoy privileges in prison because you know the right persons. You have the right contacts. And so, in a sense, the prison becomes a microcosm of the wider society. The less able and those who can't afford to grease the palms of those who they put to protect all equally, they suffer in prison, indignities and violations. The privileged ones buy relative comfort, and for them it is only marking time before they come out. So you need to even look at that, that the nature of the society has to be looked at And that is why I said, while you need laws in the society, you also have to look at the impact of the laws. A law is simply a criminal definition. I could make 100, 1,000 criminal definitions tonight if I don't know the consequences of those definitions, because you put it in the hands of a judge or a magistrate, and they interpret how you should suffer under the definition. Because I create a definition, thou shalt not scratch your head. And tomorrow Erlen didn't have hair, but he just scratched. You see? And somebody say that's a crime and you've gone to jail for scratching your hair. And I could say, Kojo, he shouldn't have touched his hair. His beautiful Rasta hair that he had. He committed a violation. Kojo, you did. And look at the result. Look what happened to handsome Kojo. So those are criminal definitions. But you have to be mindful from a sociological point of view what damage you're creating when you try ostensibly to fix something. So for me, the prison system has also to be humanized. It has to be reformed, just as prison sentences, and just as the type of treatment that is different to different folk. I've been in prison. I've been there as a guest of the state and also as a visitor. And I can tell you that you could virtually buy yourself privileges. Guys there, they throw back and they see television and they listen to music and they have a nice smoke. They got guys, other people massaging their foot and their back and the muscles and so. So it fosters even an elite in the prison system. So we have to go back and look at all of those things. I'm not calling, I believe that the decision to have recreational use of marijuana was the correct decision. But I believe we should have gone beyond that. We should have gone to look at the impact on the lives of young people, and put them in jail is not the solution. Reforming them is the solution. Rehabilitating them is the solution. And therefore, you have to revisit that as a matter of urgency. For me, that for me is a priority, because I believe we are condemning the best in our society. For what? Just a little piece of a thing that sticks out of your mouth. It may be offensive to some, but maybe people now are turning it into a business. They're turning it into a drugs that could be dispensed for useful purposes. And strange enough, it is those countries who complain that we are violating their market and corrupting their people. They are the ones who are now looking at the other side of this thing. And therefore, why should we be the last to look at it? So you raised, as I said, many issues in what you have said. But maybe we need to have a special forum to rethink about some of these substance abuse, or what is considered to be substance abuse, and to see how we could bring changes to them.
Sure. Sorry. There's anything you say about the trust part in politicians?
Well, you have said there that I don't believe that basically it's a trust issue. I'm sorry I didn't.
You actually said that.
Yes. They are saying, that's what the politicians say, is that you need to reestablish trust. But trust is a relative word. Trust don't exist by itself. Trust is an investment. It's what you put in that you get out. It don't come just like that. So if you're telling me, if I'm telling you that in order for me to get along with you, I have to trust you, I have to tell myself that there's something in you that I could invest in. I got to start telling you you're a good person. I got to start to trust you so that you begin to feel that you're trustworthy. But I can't wake up every morning and call you a traitor, and call you an enemy, and call you names, and say that I am a chatri, and you're a chamar, and I establish myself as a better human being than you are. I'm not going to big trust because I'm not investing you with any value. I'm just smothering you. I'm beating you up every day. In the political context in Guyana, What you have is a kind of machistic obsession with power and its manipulation, so that those in power feel they can beat up on you every day, and they can call you names. You know what I mean? Names don't bother me anymore, because I've been accustomed to, look at me at 68. I think I'm looking better, despite the fact that I was called a jackass. And why was that so? I started to eat better. I started to use more grass in my food.
Went green.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, so the issue for me in the society is that there is a large part of withdrawal. It is apathy and withdrawal. People feel that I shouldn't go there. That game is not for me. And the fact of withdrawal creates its own world. Because when you withdraw, you have to withdraw into something. And what you withdraw into is a world you didn't know before. So while we may say that there's a messy political situation, we should invest energy to change what we know than to withdraw into a world that we didn't know. We were not there before, so we go into spiritualism, we go into all kind of different behavior that we don't know how to deal with it. So I believe that engagement is the cure for this apathy and withdrawal. Just get engaged, get into the game, get involved, and say, I want a piece of the action. That's how you deal with it, in a positive, dynamic way.
Joel? No, Joel, then
Mr. Nagamooto, thanks for the very interesting talk. A lot of people waiting. I was happy to hear you speak to the issue to the Constitution, both the goodnesses and weaknesses of it, especially for young people. I have a related two-part question. In your response to Ruel, you alluded to power sharing. I wanted to know your position on the issue of shared governance and whether your party would be taking that position, taking a position on shared governance as part of its manifesto into possibly upcoming elections in 2015. Part two, in your talk you also referred to the issue of sexual orientation, discrimination in the Constitution. In 2001, the National Assembly had unanimously passed a broad range of reforms, largely, we're told, inspired by the South African model, the post-apartheid South African Constitution, which included sexual orientation as ground for discrimination. We had a scenario where the president resent the bill to Parliament after pressure from sections of the religious community. And in 2003, the PPPC government did something very unprecedented in Parliament, which was to present sexual orientation in a bill by itself and to announce in presenting the bill that it had no intention of supporting it. Very well knowing that at least all bills require a majority, they had a majority at the time, but constitutional amendments require two-thirds support. In 2006 and 2009, more prominently, the country became aware that there are also laws, ridiculous 19th century laws, which criminalize cross-dressing. And we're very isolated in the world when it comes to these laws. Only two other countries seem to have them, and that's Nigeria and Malaysia. And in those contexts, they stem from laws related to Islam. That said, the issue of sexual orientation discrimination is also now compounded by legal forms of discrimination with the criminalization of cross-dressing based on gender identity. I wanted to know what Nagamooto-led government would do to address those issues at the level of the Constitution in terms of discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Very profound and very interesting questions. I would tell you this on the first part. Yes, the Alliance for Change in a government and outside of a government believes in the concept of shared governance. it is an admission. It is not a policy. It is not even magnanimity on the part of anyone if they were to say that this is a country that has a diverse population. It is a secular state. You are free to be different, to practice what you feel you want to practice, even in religious belief. And therefore, you are not magnanimous if you say you want to share. The Constitution spoke to the issue of reconciliation. There is a particular clause, article of the Constitution that's talked about inclusivity. It gives you a guide. It tells you where to go. But it takes political will and political maturity to go there. And because the singular biggest problem in our country has been our ethnic difference, we need to address that in a creative and head-on way. Ethnicity in Guyana is not an abstract term. Ethnicity is an entitlement to part of the whole, or to the whole. If I were, assuming I'm Guyanese, I'm not an Indian, my status, I think others are now parading themselves as Indians, but I was born in Guyana. I am not even proud to call myself a British because I was born in British Guyana. But I'm very proud to call myself Guyanese because I was born in Guyana. If I had been born in Pakistan, maybe I would have been proud to call myself Pakistani. Or if I was born in India, I would have said, why not? I'm Indian. But because I have a unique status with other people to call ourselves Guyanese, then I realize that all of us have an interest in presiding over the affairs of Guyanese. So we start from the basis of your entitlement. And if you have an entitlement, then you must work out a form in which that entitlement can be concretized, how you can be able to play that meaningful role. Therefore, in Fiji, they have changed their constitution to say that those people who were born Fijian, whom other came and met, they consider them to be native Fijian. They amended their constitution after they had turmoil with Rabuka and them taking power and overthrowing Chowdhury, an elected government, to say that the presidency must be reserved for the indigenous people, the native people, so that you gave them an entitlement because of who they are. So they had recent arrivals. Others were coming in, and they had more people. They were populated, more populous than the indigenous people. And when they went one man, one vote, didn't produce the type of democracy that would allow the indigenous people any entitlement. So you have to be creative. So yes, because of who we are, I am of the view that even for one term, to make it appear that you want to have everybody playing a role in the government, include, because you have a system of proportional representation, you should be including a cabinet in proportion to the number of votes you have. That's only a beginning. You have a proportional representation electoral system, and you have a proportional representational cabinet, government, so that all views of the people are represented in the way you govern, or the structure you set up to govern. So yes, we will believe in a government of national unity, but I'm not saying you must necessarily constitutionalize for it. This is something that you have to work out initially, that you want to share. And come back to what my friend said, you have to invest trust in others because you're all players together. In relation to the sexual orientation, I had brought before the Parliament, and remember at one time I stepped back to return to school, and I was shocked that after I took 164 amendments to the Constitution, the Parliament, the then Jagdeo president isolated one for special treatment. That was sexual orientation. At a time when the fingers were not pointing in Moses Nagamooto's direction, the fingers were pointing elsewhere. So there was a kind of reaction that if I supported this thing, people may feel that I'm one of them. So I think that the way I read it from outside, and I came and I heard people protesting that they didn't want the government to constitutionalize that. I felt disappointed because that is what the Constituent Assembly came up with. That was a recommendation. And you couldn't then use a majority to sidetrack it and just deal with it on the basis of discrimination. It was, in fact, recognized, but only so much in the Constitution, the new sections that we put, I can't remember a section, these new 240-something, that says that a person cannot be discriminated based on the person's sexual orientation, but it didn't go beyond that. It didn't go to give substance to the fact of difference, because it was interpreted that it could mean same-sex marriage, and then you look at what the religious leaders will say, and because it was all aimed at getting votes or not getting votes. It depends how you behave in that particular situation. So it was made into an opportunistic football in the same way that cross-dressing would be recognized in the law as archaic, as totally irrelevant to our society, because I've seen, nobody tells a Scotsman when he wears a skirt that he shouldn't be wearing a skirt. And I've seen a film recently of Eckhart, the woman who flew, the first woman that flew in the Pacific or the Atlantic, where she was condemned because she wore pants. And there was a writer, Emily Burns, I believe, was also criticized. But those ethos were ethos that were brought from other societies. And I believe that some of these things ought to be purged from the law books. Someone shouldn't be criminalized for dressing any way one feels you could dress. Well, what is so offensive if we chose to dress differently from somebody else?
Yeah, just a social construct.
What's the meaning of it? You have built into the law a prejudice, a stereotypal notion of what a woman should be or what a man should be. We are human beings. That's the first thing that we must emphasize. We are human beings. And our agenda is important, but not so important that you override people's right to choose. And that's a choice issue for me. It's a rights issue, what you wish to wear. It's a human rights issue. So, yes, I believe that you need to do that, and I believe we also need to look back on the issue of sexual orientation and to keep the debate open. I don't believe that the debate is ended on this. For me, it's a human rights issue. It's no longer a gender issue. It's a human rights issue. And we are making in the world small progress. All over the world, small progress in the areas of human rights. These may be recently advocated human rights. So if you see politicians tend to be a little, they prevaricate a little bit about it, it's not that probably they don't want to support this all the way. It's because of the newness, that they are treading cautiously and they're trying to garner support as much as they can so that when you do come to constitutionalizing for sexual orientation, you know that a government that comes after you will not go and rethink with it just because it is of a different persuasion and so on. So I believe that all of these things should be seen as part of the drift towards acquiring new human rights. And those advocates of equal treatment under the law and respect for gender rights, I believe that they must not lose faith and feel that the society has damnified them. Be kind to society. The society is trying to grapple with its own historical prejudices, its own mores that have been fed into it but for centuries and can't be purged just like that. So be also take that into cognizance, and don't be judgmental, feeling that because nobody's moving, seem to be moving on these rights, that they're necessarily hostile to those rights coming into being one day.
All right, Kojo, then we go to Jamal, then we go to Garland. And we got to wrap up. I will one with you, we close up. Sorry.
All right, so I'm reading 1984 now, and the central character in 1984 is a man named Winston. He works in a government ministry, and his job is to alter the past. Is to alter newspaper clippings, any kind of historical record, movies, whatever the case may be. Now, I have heard journalists and creative professionals, people in theater and so on, say that while you were Minister of Information, the same thing happened in Guyana. That radio plays were, radio plays, photographic records disappeared or were destroyed. Could you comment on that?
That's a hard one. That's
Yeah, I think I want to say that I express regret, very profound and deep regret, that records have been damaged, records have been stolen, records have been removed, and I believe that when you're dealing with a country's records, those ought to be preserved. And I don't think that when I took over as minister, I personally don't believe I exercised enough oversight to have those records preserved. And I have seen some thrown on the floor. I went into when we relocated from Brickdam to the Homestretch Avenue, I went into the editorial room one day and I saw some of those records on the floor, and I was horrified. Because at that time I was talking to people like Enrico Wolford, Kester Alves. If records were removed, Kit Nascimento and some others, kindly bring them back. Because a lot of the GIS records, Government Information Service, in the old time that had been kept in Brickdam were removed by the time I got there. And I looked in the library section, and the shelves were all empty. So
It kind of seems though as though you're making it seem as though most of it was a case of carelessness.
well, some of them, no. No. I don't think there was a policy to destroy anything. I think some were removed, and the carelessness that was at one time that I said that I apologize for, that I should have been able to say, get those things into an archive. I fought against things in GBC. People were inside a room. I'm not going to go back to that. They were destroying tapes. There was no reason why anyone should have been destroying tapes because the government had been changed. Now we lost some of the audios that would have been there. I spoke to people who had worked in the old GIS when they had the old, you're a cinematographer, when they had the old cameras working and all of that, and they did some beautiful work, small work maybe of Guyana and politicians and so, and we probably, I don't think we lost those things. I believe those things are in private archives, some of it, and maybe someday we should go back and make a big announcement and give rewards and incentive to people to return them. But I can't just repeat, Kojo, what I said initially, that when I took over, yes, I should have exercised more oversight to have the records preserved. Let me add this quickly. There was an offer, as a minister, I had a choice of a building in Brickdam, which was then the GIS, Government Information Service building, Ministry of Information. I chose not to go there because there was an interest in the building at 7,500 US a month to a foreign agency. And it was I who reported to then President Cheddi Jagan that we will get money. Foreign exchange was in short supply then. That can I I am comfortable if I could use the office of the president, what was called in quote unquote bottom house. So my first ministry was at the bottom house of the office of the president. And I chose to remain there for a long time. So my interest in leaving that place, when I left it, was probably what caused the mayhem and the looting and the removal. If I had moved with everything at one time, then it would have been preserved. But those things, as I said, we need to learn for the future that we should not take our records lightly. Even from any government, you may not like the government, but those records belong to the people. They are part of our memory. And a nation will not know itself if it has no memory.
Good night. A lot of what you said tonight, actually, you skirted around and actually touched on a few key issues that I'd like to put forward to you. Basically, specifically, the systematic racism that is very prevalent in not just our society, but also our government, and has affected each and every single last person in this room, whether they want to admit it or not, whether it's benefited them or whether they've not benefited from it. But you spent a number of years in the PPP, and you've only been a few years in the AFC. Now, during your tenure in the PPP, did you have any sort of, I don't know, sort of experience in trying to change that system, the way it is? Because this system has been since what, colonial times, and then obviously as, you know, political parties came, they used it to their own advantage. But it's still very prevalent today. If you haven't done anything about it, what do you plan to do about it going forward? And don't tell me about the constitutional reforms. I've heard enough of that. I mean, you as my politician, so to speak, you know, a representative of me, you know, a private citizen.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I'm black, which I am, whether I'm Indian, et cetera, you understand? But this is a very key and pervasive issue, and I feel something, you know, it's something we don't talk about. Because if you raise the issue, it's like, oh no, you being racist, oh, there's a touchy subject. No, it's not a touchy subject. This subject I deal with every day. When I gotta get pulled over because, you know, the car looking a little too nice and, you know, X, Y, and Z. These are things, not just, you know, if I can't get a government contract because I'm qualified, but, you know, I don't have the right last name. What do you, Moses Nagamooto, plan to do, you know, or what have you done about it, and what do you plan to do about it, specifically?
Well, I just read a book the other day. The title of it is Race Rules. You can't deny the fact that it has historically been an important tool used to suppress one set of people by another. And I agree with you, you cannot deny it. When you read ancient philosophers even before Christ, I read the views of one Diodorus, who even went so far as to deny the possibility of a black man having white sperm. We can, you know, we could say, we can laugh about it, but in Europe, at a time when they had not accessed any black person, the black person was a creature of imagination. And therefore, they imagine what it could be to be black and what makes you different from a white person. And so these historical constructs was based on his racial antecedents. And there is a view also, which was challenged by people like Eric Williams, of slavery was a function of racism, that some inferior people ought to be subjugated. And Eric Williams, in his book, had challenged that theory and spoke to the issue of slavery being a system more to do with economics, of using other people's labor and not their race for the enrichment of another set of people.
Well, yeah, that's all.
So that's a historical thing. So I'm telling you that when you ask a question, I mean, what have you done about it? It's not Nagamooto's burden. This has been a burden of civilization trying to grapple with it. In Guyana, it was used and exploited, both. You may not be interested in the history, but I know also that up to 1964, initially, there, in the first PPP government, it was said that it was a government, it was the first nationalist government. It meant that it had brought together African Indians and others from a race point of view into playing a role in the government. But when we had our fragmentation, we know that history, Barnum Jagan, not only two personalities, there was a party that was called PPP Barnum, and there was a party that was called PPP Jagan, so that they carried their ethnic imprint on the political party. So race rules. Race ruled, and there was no simple answer for it except that you could start to bring about some social engineering. In 1975, the first time we hear talk about caretaker government, that was for the WPA, a government of national unity. Rodney and I worked on a program. We were working on a program, Walter Rodney and I. And he recognized something that many people had not recognized then. After I'd asked him a question, we were clerical building to write the program for a national government. And I asked him, I said, Walter, do you think that there's going to be a role for the PNC in this? And he instinctively said, I didn't even think he needed to think. He said, once the PNC subscribed to democracy, there is always going to be a role for the PNC because it's an authentic black party. He recognized race as an important aspect of the political division of Guyana. In other words, while you could have recognized that PNC as an institution, as a party, had done some wrong things, he recognized that it was an umbrella that had black people, and you don't penalize the black people for the fault of the rulers. So the first thing I believe we have to appreciate in Guyana in trying to approach the ethnic problematic is that the people are not the guilty ones here. They have been manipulated by the external colonial power, by their political leaders who use racism as a weapon of political mobilization. I know today when PPP, the Jagdeo people, and the Ramatar people go to my village, what do you think they're talking?
Oh, scary black man time.
Right. The black man is the Jambi. They hold out the black Jambi to scare the Indians. And not only that, they also said, you see that Jat, Moses? Well, you know it's Jat. Jat is a Hindi word. They wouldn't go and use a straightforward English word in an Indian community. They will use a word that will send a message.
I want that is. What John?
Pubic hair. You see? And when, you know, Ramatar goes into the village and he said, you see, then Moses Nagamooto, he go, whole Laura. He used a Hindi word to demonize me, and you know what Laura is? It's the penis. Right? It's the prick. So you got to deal with this issue of race, that you have racism and you have inverse racism. It is not used only to demonize the race of the other side, it is used to demonize your own race. So when Mr. Nanlal said about he being a Chatri and we in control, he differentiates himself as an Indian from other Indians. He's a super Indian. And the other one, they're
Visit Shamar?
at the bottom, Chamar, the shetty cleaners. And then they could, Nandlal could go in Blackbush Pola and tell Indian people in Blackbush Pola that when they had the Agricola riots or the Agricola protests, you know who been there by? Moses. Nagamooto carried them black people from Buxton into Agricola. That's the language. We have him now on tape. We have him on tape telling the Indians that I took black people from Buxton. They had to choose Buxton, not any village, because Buxton was already demonized, was stigmatized with all the bad values you could think of black excess behavior. So they had to be Buxton youth I recruited to do what? To assault Indian girls. Indian girls. And then another one said, they saw me in a Chinese restaurant directing the operation. So racism in Guyana now has gone beyond the pale of traditional racism. I hate you because of your race. I hate you not because of your race. I hate you because your behavior aids you. So now when they see, if I talk to Granger, they see that as a big thing, that I ought not to be on the platform with Granger because a vote for the AFC or a vote for Nagamooto is a vote for Granger. In other words, a vote for black man. And they frighten, they use this as a thing. So I believe that you have to start, why we are talking about government of national unity, is to be able to create, you're not going to be able to heal the individual. Nandlal, for example, is beyond healing. When you go to the Kali Puja, they say they have a catharsis, they have some neem leaf. You know, they say the neem is good for all now. Purpose, they got some neem leaf and they dip it in a bucket of dye water, turmeric water, and they beat you like this. Boom, 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 boom. It happens also, Jehovah's Witness and so on. And they think that that could cure you of your whatever you're struck with. But Nandlal and some of them, they're immune. That dye water, even if you give them to drink, the whole bucket isn't going to cure them. So that what I'm saying is that you have to look for institutional form of changing this. You can't start with the personal behavior.
Right, well, this is already,
right?
Like you said, it's systematic. So,
Right.
I mean, let's say, how would you broach, forget you're in a meeting here, you understand?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody here, or at least I'd like to think everybody here is some sort of forward and or free thinker, you understand?
Yes.
I mean, how do you broach, this is something that's ingrained in Guyanese culture. If I meet a Guyanese outside of Guyana, I halfway expect them, actually no, I expect them to have, whether they're black, Indian, Amerindian, I expect them to have prejudices and behaviors already conditioned. It's become generational, it's become part of our culture, right? So how now...
How do we begin to address it?
But you, brother.
Not by just addressing it, but I mean, how do you get rid of it, so to speak?
Well, then...
I mean, your first thought is what you're conditioned to think. Your second thought is what you already, you know.
Yeah, but then when you deal with the healing balm, I can tell you my story, you could tell me your story. Because when they had that situation post Rwanda and in South Africa, they had the reconciliation took a form of telling each other the truth. Mm-hmm. I grew up literally in the arm of a black man. I was delivered by a black woman, Nurse Michelle. The first day I went to school, I was plopped out of my yard, literally without pants. I went the first day to school because a teacher named Teacher Moore decided that I should go to school. So it didn't matter if the wheelie was showing, but that was a small price I paid for being educated. So in my life, I had the experience where my godfather was black. He literally died in my arm, Stephen Leach. Mm-hmm. The whole life system would show that we interacted from our young days. Yeah. It was not offensive. Mm-hmm. It was not competitive. It was sheer affection and love of one human being for another. And if you start sharing the story, that you had lived a non-contentious life and you coexisted even though you are of a different ethnic orientation or of an ethnic, why I say orientation, I'll tell you that the reason for saying that, or of origin, then you could sell the story that it is possible that we could all live together without having to fight each other. When they had, in 1958, Ghana became independent, I recall my father. It's an amazing thing. He, with feathers on his head, he's dancing on the road, singing Ghana, Ghana is my name. There was a coolie man. But he was there with Africans in the village because this was their day, this was their thing, sharing their joy, sharing their sense of freedom. And I find a lot of that, we are losing it. Because today I am in the office in Robb Street, King and North Road, King Street and North Road. On Robb Street, they got 3 or 4 music places selling records. The whole day you hear Anjanike Lal and you hear Radhika. Not a single black shop in this city plays a black music. I don't see a black record shop where they put the box out there and they play some of the beautiful song of Miriam Makeba, or some beautiful song in Swahili, or the beautiful songs in Yoruba. We have seemed to affect ourselves, our own pride. Don't blame the others. It is what we sell of ourselves, what we say of ourselves, who we are and what we are. So that while it is possible for you to have a Diwali every year and people light up their trucks and their cars and so on, because it represents some day of light in their life, when we have Emancipation Day, we don't find the lights coming out on Emancipation Day. We don't find the same embrace of symbolism of freedom of this new light and liberty among African people. Why? Because Africans don't have the economic wherewithal that they can promote these events as events that they could put on television or they can advertise black clothes and so on. So we have to mix the story with the pride. We have to inculcate a lot of ourselves in the story and that we are proud of who we are. Politically, you could change a few things. You could make a few laws, but it's not going to change who we are, and it's not going to change the way we think about each other. Culture. Royal, as a writer, you know that the idea is to change your mind. Bob Marley, Brother Bob, is talking about the mental slavery, and we have to start doing the story. Even if we start rather late now, we have to sell the story of ourselves. And the policy framework will come when you're able to evolve, as I said, Walter, recognize that there is room for all if you adopt certain stands. It's not that you have to be black in order to qualify to be democratic or you have to be Indian to qualify. Question is that there must be an entitlement in a structure that you get representation in accordance with your number. Start numerically, and you probably will be able to build. It will be possible in the future for us to have a system where people will just vote for you, not because of your political party or because of your race, but because they think you're good for who you are. Because the greatest irony in Guyana is that I find so many, you go into the Indian villages, and they say, "Bye, you go to make them black man come back power." And the same person you see a few days after lining up with either the US Embassy or they're lining up at the airport and they're going to the black man country. The black man is good for America, but suddenly the black man is bad for Guyana. They run and go to Antigua or they go to Suriname, but they don't seem to have a problem who rule in those societies, because the problem in this country is still a class problem of who you are economically. And if people they feel that they could be hurt, their economic security could be hurt, then they tend to hold on to an artificial value, like weed up on top. We running things because the game is in your favor. In Guyana, for example, some people may feel that they have economic security because Indians are ruling. And that will change if you begin to spread the pie and everybody feel content in the society. They didn't mind who was ruling. In Trinidad, I have the amazing feeling. You go there and everybody voting and you have the contention on election day. And after election day, we gone by Curep and we knocking some rum with the Trinidadian and you're busting a lime and you see the coolie man and the black man in Trinidad. They ain't talking politics. They're talking about whether the next line coming up and which band they will join, because they all have an economic spread that they don't have a disparity to feel one race is threatening the other. So that some of these things have to be looked at not only politically, but in relation to how you have economic redistribution of the wealth of the society. All right?
Actually, I had another question because of the previous conversation. I just wanted to comment. Because the subject of race is so deep in the conversation, and even in your own presentation on it, I think we're confronted, even in the linguistics and language, the use of terms, descriptions of people, we're confronted with yet that unresolved conceptual race in the country, and what race is, and race is a system of privilege, and black versus resilient in the way we use words in the country. So I think that for me is one thing in particular that points to it. And you gave a lot of examples of racial transcendence, which we have many moments of racial transcendence in the country. But I think that what even your presentation doesn't point to is that deeper revolutionary instinct that is necessary to change the very formulation and conceptualization of race in the country. And I think that that has to be a starting point. And what I gathered from Jamal's question was, how have you confronted that revolutionary instinct within the AFC, which used it also as a praxis, as part of its praxis, even now, as well as how have you confronted it in the PPP when you were part of the PPP, which traditionally also used it as part of its praxis, also as the PNC did, as we admit. But that was not my question, but I had to make a comment. The question is, and if you look at the model, and you mentioned earlier the notion of shared governance and what shared governance means, and I personally have, played around with this idea in my mind too. My biggest fear is that the proposition is made by yourself and David Hines and so on, this idea of executive power sharing. I see it as a conspiracy against the masses. I don't want my politicians to come together and share executive power, because who is going to tell them when they're out of order? It becomes a self-interested cabal. And I think that when we look at Suriname just over there, what we see is the need for interest groups, and I use interest groups loosely, not really in the American sense that could be negative, but the sense that groups of people, whether LGBT groups or African groups or East Indian groups or youth groups or whatever, have to organize themselves in political movements and advance their own interests in the political society. So in other words, that you move to shared governance from positions of strength, that you are able to advance your interests within the political discourse, and that your interest is represented at the level of political governance, the executive power. And this is what happens in Suriname, just over the border. In Suriname, the African groups, the Maroons have their political party, the East Indians have their political party, Japanese have their political party, and you might have an election and wait 3 months to announce the person who is the president, because everybody got to go around and negotiate with the interest groups. I'm not saying that's the perfect model, but I'm saying that that is something that I think moves one step beyond our discourse on shared governance. And having said that, therefore, my question is, would you, who a politician concerned with deeper change in the society, be willing to cede even your own political interests in terms of presidential candidacy or winning the presidential elections to a consensus candidate?
Repeat the last part you said about the consensus candidate.
Well, would you be willing to step aside if
that notion was presented to you of a consensus candidate as available?
Yes. Well, that is all. That is the that's the purpose of having political negotiations that would be based and premised on compromise. You have to, in the Guyana context, you have to know what you're fighting against in order to know what weapon you need to use. In this country, I strongly believe that hitherto the PPP felt that it had the arithmetic on its side. The racial arithmetic would permit the PPP to win a plurality of vote based on Indian preeminence in numbers. So it didn't matter how many other parties you have, that arithmetic is a mathematical truth.
You mean still or used to be?
No, but I'm telling you, that's what it used to be, hitherto. What is the reality now? The PNC has an arithmetic on its side, or call it APNU, from the empirical evidence of past elections. Take even the last one. It was amazing, go back before that in 1985, 1997. Mr. Hoyt in 97, strange enough, had 40% of the votes, which is exactly what the PNC had in 1964. So that the arithmetic is that if you had at most an election today, APNU would get 40% of the votes. 40% of the votes would not make it the government. The PPP would still have the arithmetic because you have Indians and Amerindians. You don't hyphenate Amerindians now. If you hyphenate it, you have Indians and hyphenated Indians, Amerindians. So they believe that if they work on those two fronts, they don't have to make any compromise. They don't have to make, there's no consensus in that. It's all about straight here versus twisted here. You have to get the optics here. And what I'm talking to you, brother, is from my heart. I haven't written the script. I haven't written the script, but I wish we could start bringing this ugliness of what happens in the society, perhaps in the language it is known and bandied about in the society, and still see if we can distill the ugliness of the situation and the language used. We may have misprescription. I may say black instead of African. I may say Koli instead of Indian. But this is only what is being played out. My little grandson, my wife was there, we just jumped into the car, coming from the airport, and where it is? In Iowa City, in Iowa. And he was telling me about intellectual laziness. Sita, how old is he? 5? Mark is how many? 6 years old. He was taking me up about the world history because it could have been her story and not his story. And that's how language came into being in terms of the prejudices of historical development. And I learned in a book that my daughter lent me, reading one of the writer Killins talking about the story, the grandfather reading to the grandchild, that ends with a fight. In the fight where the lion was fighting the man, it was the man who was always killing the lion. And the grandchild asked Grandpa, why is it always this man is killing this powerful lion? And then Grandpa said, well, one day when the lion begins to write the story, it will end differently. So all of this, the use of language and what is happening here tonight, may be a new experience for us to be talking about things using the language that we're accustomed to hear, because those who have been writing the story and dominating the story want us to believe that this is a fight between black man and Koli man and Indian and African. We are Guyanese. Nobody has ever talked about this disputation among Guyanese for entitlements. We are dealing with their ethnic, who they are in an ethnic sense, not a national sense. So in the PPP, because of the way the politics developed, ethnicity was used as a weapon of political mobilization. In the PNC, it was the same. They were characterized by the two archetype leader, the maximum leaders. They have the picture, the epitome of what this party would have been. So we didn't change that. You asked me what I did in the PPP. Yes, I would probably have the same view I told Jomo. The story I would tell, it goes beyond that. I've heard even in my own party, when people heard that I was a Christian, that Moses baptized and he was a Christian, you hear the side talk that the closest you could come to being a black man is when you're a Christian. I heard those things because even it might have been considered as an ethos that the PP was a Hindu party. And you couldn't be Christian in a Hindu-dominated party. That was a disqualification. You couldn't be in the PPP, fight to be leader or presidential candidate in a party that says it is communist, and you refuse to study in Moscow. Nagamooto refused to be an Orthodox communist. That's a disqualification. So inside this matrix, there are several side games, subplots inside that make the Guyana situation not entirely an ethnic war or an ethnic battle. We are all fighting little zombies inside our own camps. Now, come back to what you say. If you want to have a united opposition to defeat who you identify to be the obstacle to the country's progress, as represented now by the Ramotar Jagdeo PPP, and you're dealing with that arithmetic, wouldn't you consider that you stand a better chance if you put an Indo-Guyanese as your presidential candidate? This is an opinion. I'm not giving you the answer. It's an opinion, how to deal with the arithmetic. When we had the situation recently in Sri Lanka, Rajapaksa was the commander who smothered the Tamil Tigers. The Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka, they came a lot from the Dravidians. When I said we're talking about orientation, my generation, my ancestor, are the archetypes of Dravidians. In India, the Dalits and the Dravidians were considered to be outcasts. They're black. They came from the south. Once I had an experience in India where I stretched my hand to shake a guy's hand. And he watched me. He was told, this is our friend Moses Nagamooto from Guyana, from the Caribbean. And the man withdrew his hand, an official. I drew that. I made a protest about it. He was looking in my eyes and he said, look at him. Look at his eyes. He's from Andhra. He was speaking to a friend of mine who was an Indian, telling me, describing me that I came from Andhra. Andhra means bottom, below. Uttar is at the top. If you came from Uttar Pradesh, you're supposed to be a high caste. If you came from Andhra Pradesh, you're a low caste. So you can't shake hand with a low caste. But I'm a Guyanese. I didn't go there as an Indian. And I took offense at that. So that in Sri Lanka, they had this battle where the Dravidians, the Tamils were seen as Dravidians. They were seen like the black man in an Indian society. And the Rajapaksa led a war. Most of that, it was 26 years war. Nobody felt he could have been defeated because the Sinhalese, the Hindu Buddhist majority, would have always had the arithmetic on Rajapaksa's side. He would have always won an election. But a minister defected, resigned from his party, Sirisena, who had been defense minister once, fought against it, and also Minister of Health, but he came from the Sinhalese. So when he went up and said, I'm going to put myself up as presidential candidate 3 weeks before the elections, 48 parties came and joined him. The Tamils joined him, and the Muslims joined him, and the Buddhists joined him. And for the first time, you had somebody who could have taken votes from Rajapaksa, majority Sinhalese. And that's how the opposition went. So I put that to you again. If you have a situation where the racial ethnic arithmetic will favor a particular party, and you need to be able to change the outcomes, you have to be strategic. You don't think about who is the larger party. The APNU could say it's a large party with 40%, but it remains 40% large. It's never going to be the winning party. So you want to know to transform your numerical number strength into a strategic political number that gives you victory. And for me, it is not Moses Nagamooto is the issue. For me, it's not important what place I occupy there or not. It's not important what place I occupy. But if you think that there is a strategic importance in the placement of your generals, you don't put your best fighters at the back in the trench. You put them in front because they could deliver the results. And I believe that we have to think strategically in Guyana and not just in our numerical, what I call cocoon. Because I grew up seeing a little worm falling from the tree, and every time it falls, I put my foot on it, it folds up like this. It comes into a cocoon. It's of no use being a worm if all you do is fold up yourself because somebody offend you, right? So that's how I see politics. So we'd have to compromise, but the compromise can't be based only on personality. Must never be based on personality. It must be based that the parties that are coming together must adopt a common program. They'll have to have a common program. What do we intend to do? You must have that. Then you have to decide on how you will form your consensus state to give it balance, ethnic, gender balance, youth balance. You'll have to do several things before you arrive at the personality. You know why? Because the personality becomes the most polarizing effect in coalition building, because you can fall immediately if you start to talk about which one going to run the show, boy. You fail immediately. Start building the structure, build the momentum. Right now, this idea of the pro-democracy alliance is winning already because the PPP feels very vulnerable. It feels that it is being squinched to the wall because people are talking about unity, and they are now living in the shadows of Sri Lanka, and they believe that if you have unity, then you could defeat the incumbent, which is what this whole thing is about, which is why they are dilly-dallying about elections. Because in a three-way fight, the vote go three ways. The PPP got 35%, the APNU get 34%, and the AFC get 31%. You end up with the PPP with 35% forming the government eventually exactly where you are. And the two parties fragmented their vote. Although they got 65%, you're still in the majority in the opposition. And one day I was taking a ride with Julius Nyerere when he visited Guyana, and an amazing conversation went on, and he was laughing because he just addressed the cabinet, and he was shaking his head, and he said, nowhere in the world is there such a thing called Her Majesty's opposition. Nowhere in the world do you have a loyal opposition. So if you have 65% of your people forming the opposition, they're going to rebel because 65% not going to subjugate itself to 35%. So therefore, if you want that outcome, then you could forget consensus. You could forget going jointly, and you can remain who you are. And you'll remain pristine and pure in who you are, but you'll never be the government of Guyana.
Yeah. Good point. Last question, and then we close it off.
Good evening. Aristotle said that man by nature is a political animal, right? And it comes back down to trust, as my friend here was saying. And this period of time, there's going to be a lot of rhetoric, right? You don't know who to favor and whatnot and whatnot. And I did some research on pre-1992 there, and it was very distasteful, very much. Stagnation, and there was a lot of unaccountability at that time. Then Jagan came, and for me, Jagan from 92 to 97 was the best year in Guyana's era, in the era of Guyana. And the great economist, he came in early 2000, Mr. Jaglio, and they said there's much development, right? But there's very much unaccountability, right? And accountability is the word, right? Are there steps in Parliament to deal with declaration of assets for ministers and people in power? What else am I trying to say?
Accountability, standards and accountability, yes.
And what are you going to do, right? With this word nepotism, right? This word nepotism comes on fairness, right? And a lot of people who don't have connections are being treated very unfair in this country, very, very, very much so. And it travels across section of people, right? For instance, you would see a man knock down a businessman would knock down a man, you pay some money, and you'll be sitting down in farm for drinking, right? But in America, he would be charged for manslaughter, still he had to pay that fine to those people. Regards to unemployment, as you mentioned earlier, people like me, I don't have no connection. So since I graduated, I'm at home. I don't dig in no ministry to give me a job.
This is from you.
Yeah, that's from me. So what are you going to do with the word nepotism? Regarding to people in the government who have people CXC graduates filling big positions. Certain ministries are very female savvy. It's flooded with females. I don't know why, right? I've known some people who sit shining up. They have no qualifications, right? So, what are you going to do about that?
Well, maybe I put more females.
But there isn't a just, that's why the brain drain is there and the government is not addressing the brain drain.
Yeah, no, but brother, it may seem odd, but you see, if you're trying to equal the playing field, I didn't mind if more women were brought in, because historically they were excluded. So I'm just saying that because you sometimes have to make up for the inequity of the past, and you have to show that, demonstrate that. But if you did it in a way that is nepotistic, that you favor someone because the person is your relative or your family, then that for me doesn't justify the appointment. Nepotism is corruption. It is akin to favoritism, but favoritism could be I could favor anyone I know, but nepotism is when I favor someone who is of my ilk, of my kit. It's kit and kin, my own. And that is bad. You could who the caps fits pull the string. Now the issue is that you raise about integrity. We have a law provided for by the Constitution that there shall be an integrity commission. And the Integrity Commission will function under a law which we have. Guyana doesn't have a chairman of the Integrity Commission. The Integrity Commission is headless. Now it can't function. All persons who hold public office ought to make a declaration of their asset to the Integrity Commission. Then the Integrity Commission goes out and sends people to investigate your bank account, how much you have, and where did the extra come from. Did you receive a gift? You have to declare the gift. And if you have done improvement to your house or you bought a new property, you have to say where you get the money from. Now, if people were all asked to do that, then you would have had a fair idea as to how people have what they have. Because as an attorney, I may not get cases from these people. They have cut off all the links from me from because I say NISIL got $50 billion, and I say it again. And I say it, Washington, $50 billion. They got to account for the people's money. They cut off all the cases for me. I no longer work for them. And they did the same with all other government works. So the question is that there is money also hidden away in bank accounts that have never been declared. The law says that all public monies must go into something called the consolidated fund. That is called the national purse. It doesn't matter where you get money from, it must go there. There's no right for NISIL to be spending $58 million to build a hotel, a Marriott hotel, and it has never gone to the parliament. That money should be refunded into the national coffer. The People's Parliament decide what the money should be used for. But a couple of friends, and the chairman of the board of NISIL is the Minister of Finance. And the Minister of Finance, his entire budget and what he does is audited by his wife. So you have nepotism is now compounded with a different type of relationship. There's a name for that, incestuousness. And so Guyana must be one of the few countries in the world where you have a government freely elected by the people, even though it's a minority, that lacks legitimacy. Its lawlessness in the eyes of the law has disappeared because of the incestuous relationship people have with people's money, the way they access it and the way they spend it. And so we need to have very quickly the integrity legislation where everyone declares, once you decide that you're running for office, when Clinton would run for office in 2015, I can tell you this. These are the future in their hands, the Royal Johnsons and the Orleans and so on. They have to declare who they are from the beginning. You can't be an Anlal Chatri and say, I rich before I came into government. Who you think you're fooling? I came into the government in order to be poor. You understand? Yes. So you see the way they're setting themselves up is that people mustn't suspect that there is anything unusual because I came in with money. Therefore, you could do, if somebody see me buying 5 or 6 cars or 2 or 3 houses, is me money because I was rich before I came into public life. Well, declare before you come into public life what you got. So there's a law. So we're also, how do you acquire sleaze money? How do you acquire dirty money? Dirty money comes by opportunities. They don't fall like manna from heaven. It is an opportunity to access the dirty money. In Guyana, our cabinet approves all contract. I am in agreement with a road from East Bank, Demerara, to East Coast. They should have built that road before they did the 4-lane. That was, you know, putting the cart before the horse. In order to ease the congestion from East Bank, link the 2 roads. And you probably would have rethink whether you need 4-lane. The problem is not bigger roads. The problem is strategic roads, right? Rupert Ryan said the other day is that you didn't need the Hope Canal. Maybe he's right. Maybe he's not right. But to me, fundamentally, the issue was how to drain excess water and where do you drain it? It would have been better to drain it in the Demerara River. So it is how to create an artery, which is a strategic artery, to put your excess water in the conservancy into the Demerara River, then to start on the basis, theoretically, if we are 6 feet below sea level, you start getting a canal to go up. Well, I don't see one day Guyana water might be the first water that reach the heavens, the way we are going, because for me, that's dealing with an engineering difficulty initially to run the Hope Canal to drain into the Atlantic Ocean, knowing that the ocean is higher than where you are right now. Okay? So if you deal with that issue of how they acquire the money, you would know that the Constitution says that there shall be, not must, any other word may, shall be a Public Procurement Commission. And a Public Procurement Commission is to ensure that the procedure for bidding for contract is in place. and that someone who feels discriminated can have access to a review. There should be a tribunal to investigate how contracts are awarded. Now, you have a situation where in the past 10 years, if I go back even for 10 years, you probably have about $3 trillion, Guyana dollar, trillion, you just keep multiplying the knots, and you will see what I mean, have gone out into contracts. The cabinet control the contracts, and they know, when you talk about favoritism, who their friends are, who get the contracts, because the bigger the contracts, the bigger the drawbacks. And so the sleaze money gets into the official's pocket. I was in cabinet, and I was amazed at what they do. I stood up one day and told them, why is it you all giving the person who scored less marks the contract than the man who got the more marks? And constantly I had a battle with Jack Day, and I want to remind him of that battle when he will tell me, oh, my boys, what wrong with you, boy? If you do the Public Procurement Commission, how them buy go get the contract? How the party go get the money? You see, this is kind of create these things because you know who they're talking about when they go to the kind of Creolese language. So you have this systemic corruption that takes place because you have no control over how contracts are done freely and fairly. Now, you had the anti-money laundering law. This big game that they're talking about, I sat in 2009, 2000, in a committee to bring into being the anti-money laundering law. There is an anti-money laundering law. No one has ever been investigated. Yet the president of Guyana could sit in a plane on literally a rice bag of US dollars, sitting on it. And he didn't express rage that, gosh, I mean, I was riding this plane here all the time, and don't know this money, this was a laundering machine. He didn't express revulsion about this thing, but one wants to know that's how money is being washed. Now, no one, it took the Puerto Rican and the United States to tell us that somebody was laundering money, bringing in money, proceeds, and then you see big things and so on going up. But the question is that a lot of that money that gets into contract are getting into people's pocket. So you could have the anti-money laundering law there. You don't need to improve it. Improve it, yes, you make it better. But the question is, you could have charged people under the existing law. So my point has always been that they're making too much noise about this anti-money laundering act, because you do have an intelligence unit, a one-man, Mr. Gear intelligence unit, that is very unintelligent because nobody has been investigated and nobody has been brought to book. So it has to be very dunce, very dumb. And so you have that situation where they were saying that you need a bigger and better anti-money laundering law. And my answer to that was, you have a ship of state. It is sailing, you got a nice sail, you could make the sail bigger, but if you have a hole in the bottom, which is procurement, which is your contract, that is boring a hole at the bottom of your ship, the ship will sink irrespective of how big you get that sail. So it's not a better anti-money laundering that you need. It is better enforcement and caulking the hole of procurement, which make these fat cats fatter. So you're going to have to deal condignly with corruption and nepotism. And I can't see how you could escape in the new government a tribunal setup. Because Guyana's problem, you said it, you talk about jobs, brother. You talk about how it is being done. And the other, you talk about working and not, getting enough, you're a working poor. Question in the country is that there is disparity. The lopsided, the triangle is now turned upside down. It's an inverted triangle where the base at the bottom is narrow and the top is big. The top is the poor people. 20% of our people are unemployed. We have that situation at the top. The society, the narrow bottom of rich at the bottom, got to carry that at the top. Then you got to carry in this country a nation where we earn 4,000 US per month, the per capita income and per year, and Trinidad and St. Kitts and St. Nevis getting 13,000 US. The small 2x2 islands get 13,000, so it means you have to subsidize the $4,000 people there from somewhere. You got to subsidize that. Then you have In this country, the reports show that we have below the poverty level, you have a large percentage of people who are just not poor, they're below the poverty level. So you've got to carry them also. So that the inverted, the triangle is going to collapse because it's carrying too much because only few get everything at the bottom and at the top got very little. So you'll have to have economic justice if the aim of any investigation into corruption is not simply to punish those who are corrupt, but to see that the society redistributes its income to allow the larger majority to benefit from the wealth of the society, and that is not arrogated to a few and to empower a few with wealth and privileges. And that is where we have to start to build a kind of society that is based on equality, it is based on brotherhood and sisterhood, it's based on an assumption that we are all equal under the law. And that's the society I would like to lend my energies towards, even if it's the last energy. As I said, I'd like to go down with the verse of St. John, there's nothing more glorious than saying at the end of your day that all my life, all my energies have been spent towards the promotion of man. Because this life is given to us, as Ostrovsky said, once. And we can't relive it. So we have to give it youths, young people, we have to give everything into that. Because that is how we recreate ourselves if we are able to invest who we are into the values of our society, which is a just society.
So this is the point where we put up our hands and say who's going to vote for Mr. Nagamooto. Not really. I see Ruel already putting up. Mr. Nagamooto, on behalf of Blue Caps, on behalf of everybody present here, I want to express profound gratitude and thank you for accepting our invitation to come here this afternoon and this evening and speaking to the young people present and also for taking the questions and for me providing a very informative and detailed representation on all the issues and all the questions that were asked here this evening. I certainly have a deeper appreciation for your platform and for what you stand for. This is the first time really in a close-up environment I've heard you speak and articulate yourself on issues. I want to wish you well in your endeavors in 2015, and I want to say thank you again for being here this evening.
Thank you for having me.
I also want to thank you guys for coming out this evening to another Let's Talk. We'll probably have another one before the end of the month. We're trying to get Mr. David Granger to come. If it's not Granger, we also have already confirmed Mr. Nigel Hughes, who wants to come and talk about the constitutional reform. But we'll try to get all the political actors, the main political actors, to come share their views. We'll record them and we'll put them on social media so it could reach a wide audience. Again, thank you for coming this evening.
Thank you.